Beloved, today I want to speak to those who are confused, those who are hurting, and those who are asking God a painful question. Why are people leaving my life? Why did that friend disappear? Why did that relationship break? Why did support suddenly turn into silence? Hear me clearly. God is not punishing you. God is positioning you. Before God elevates a person, He often reduces the circle around them. Elevation requires separation. Promotion requires preparation. And destiny demands discernment. In Scripture, before Joseph was elevated to the palace, he was separated from his brothers. Before Moses led Israel, he was removed from Egypt. Before David sat on the throne, he was pushed into the wilderness. What looked like rejection was actually divine direction. There are moments in life when everything familiar begins to shift. People you once talked to daily slowly fade away. Support that felt strong suddenly disappears. Conversations feel forced, and connections that once energized you now feel heavy. In those moments, it is easy to assume something has gone wrong. But often what feels like loss is actually God's hand at work. Before God elevates a person, He almost always introduces a season of separation. Separation is not God rejecting you, it is God refining you. Throughout Scripture, separation consistently appears before promotion. Joseph was separated from his family before he was elevated to govern Egypt. Moses was removed from the palace before he was called to lead a nation. David was separated from the comfort of home and sent into obscurity before he was anointed king. In every case, separation came first. God understands that elevation without preparation can destroy a person, so He lovingly prepares His chosen ones through distance, silence, and pruning. Separation shifts your dependence. When people are removed, you are forced to lean more deeply on God. When familiar voices are gone, you begin to hear God's voice more clearly. Many believers want elevation, but still rely heavily on human approval, human support, and human affirmation. God, in His wisdom, removes these supports. So your faith is no longer anchored in people, but rooted in Him alone. True elevation requires spiritual maturity, and maturity grows best in seasons where God becomes your primary source. This season can be uncomfortable because separation often feels lonely, but loneliness is not the same as abandonment. God never leaves His people. He simply changes their environment. He pulls you away from noise so He can speak to you clearly. He removes distractions so your vision can sharpen. In the quiet, God reshapes your character, strengthens your prayer life, and deepens your trust. What feels like isolation is actually divine intimacy. Separation also reveals who and what truly belongs in your future. Some relationships are meant to be seasonal, not permanent. They serve a purpose for a time, then gracefully exit when that purpose is fulfilled. God removes people not because they are bad, but because they are no longer aligned with where He is taking you. Elevation requires alignment. You cannot walk into a new season carrying old weights, old mindsets, and old limitations. Another reason separation precedes elevation is protection. Not everyone celebrates your growth. Some people are comfortable with who you were, but uncomfortable with who you are becoming. God removes these influences before they can hinder your progress, contaminate your faith, or sabotage your calling. What looks like rejection is often God's protection operating quietly behind the scenes. Separation also teaches obedience. When God begins to distance you from people, habits, or environments, your response matters. If you cling to what God is releasing, you delay your elevation. But when you trust Him enough to let go, you position yourself for promotion. Obedience in the hidden season leads to honor in the public season. Elevation changes responsibility. God does not elevate people to bless only themselves. He elevates them to impact others. Before He increases your influence, He increases your discipline. Before He expands your platform, He purifies your heart. Separation is where God deals with pride, fear, insecurity, and dependence. He removes what is unnecessary so what is essential can flourish. If you are experiencing separation right now, do not panic. Do not assume failure. Ask God what He is preparing you for. This season is temporary. but its purpose is eternal. God is teaching you how to stand strong without constant support, how to trust without visible reassurance, and how to walk by faith and not by sight. Separation is not the end of your story. It is the bridge to your elevation. What God separates, He later multiplies. What He removes, He replaces with something greater. Stay faithful, stay obedient, and stay trusting. Your elevation is not delayed, it is being prepared. There comes a moment in every believer's journey when God begins to clarify direction. The path ahead becomes sharper, the calling becomes heavier, and the cost of obedience becomes clearer. In that moment, it becomes evident that not everyone who walked with you in one season can walk with you into the next. This is not cruelty. It is reality. God is intentional about who accompanies you. Because destiny is fragile and purpose is sacred, people are often comfortable with you at a level where you remain familiar, accessible, and non-threatening. But when God begins to elevate you, the dynamics change. Your vision expands, your standards rise, and your priorities shift. Some people grow uncomfortable not because you did anything wrong, but because your growth exposes their stagnation. God, in His mercy, removes them before their discomfort turns into discouragement or resistance in your life. Throughout biblical history, God consistently limited the number of people involved in moments of breakthrough. Gideon's army was ready before victory came. Jesus often withdrew from crowds and ministered deeply to only a few. Even in Jesus' life, not everyone was invited into every moment. Some stayed in the crowd, some followed at a distance, and only a few entered the inner circle. Proximity is not about favoritism, it is about assignment. When God is taking you to a higher level, He removes those who cannot understand the weight of the calling. Some people want the blessing without the burden, the promise without the process. They enjoy the benefits of your obedience, but resist the discipline required to sustain it. God removes such relationships not to hurt them, but to help you. Elevation demands people who will push you forward, not pull you back. There are also individuals who are spiritually incompatible with your next season. They may love you, but they do not share your hunger for God, your commitment to growth, or your willingness to sacrifice. When you begin to move deeper with God, their lack of alignment becomes a distraction. God cannot fully release His plans in an environment of constant compromise. So He changes the environment by removing certain connections. This process can feel painful because humans naturally seek belonging. We want to be understood, supported, and accepted. But divine calling often requires walking paths that others cannot relate to. God teaches you to find your identity in Him rather than in relationships. When approval from people fades, approval from God becomes louder. This shift is essential because elevation exposes you to both praise and criticism. If your confidence is rooted in people, elevation will break you. If it is rooted in God, elevation will strengthen you. Some people are removed because they are tied to your past identity. They remember who you were before growth, before healing, before maturity. God removes them because they unconsciously pull you backward through expectations, labels, and memories that no longer reflect who you are becoming. You cannot step into a new identity while constantly being reminded of an old one. God also removes people who benefit from you remaining small. Some relationships survive only as long as you do not surpass them. When your growth threatens their comfort, insecurity arises. God, who sees the heart, steps in before envy, manipulation, or subtle sabotage damages your progress. What looks like abandonment is actually divine intervention. Learning to accept these removals requires trust. Trust that God sees what you cannot see. Trust that He knows who can handle your next level. Trust that obedience is more valuable than familiarity. The pain of separation fades, but the consequences of dragging the wrong people into your destiny can last a lifetime. In time, God replaces what He removes. He brings new relationships, mentors, helpers, and covenant connections that align with your purpose. These people will not just celebrate your success, they will understand your sacrifices. They will not just applaud your elevation, they will protect it. If people are leaving your life as you move forward with God, do not resist it. Do not chase what God is releasing. Honor the season, bless those who depart, and keep walking in obedience. Where God is taking you requires strength, focus, and alignment. Not everyone can go there, and that is not a loss, it is a gift. When God prepares to elevate a person, He becomes deeply protective of their destiny. Elevation brings exposure, influence, and responsibility, and God will never allow distractions to sabotage what He has ordained. This is why, before promotion, God often begins removing voices, relationships, habits, and environments that quietly weaken faith and distort focus. What may feel sudden or confusing is actually God shielding your future. Distractions are rarely obvious at first. They often come disguised as familiarity, comfort, or obligation. They are not always sinful, many are simply unnecessary. Yet anything that consistently pulls your attention away from God's purpose becomes dangerous over time. God, who sees the full picture, removes these distractions because He knows that divided focus leads to diluted power. A life called to impact many must first learn how to focus on the one. Throughout Scripture, God repeatedly calls His people away from distraction before revealing His plans. Jesus often withdrew from crowds, even from good crowds, to spend time alone in prayer. Though the crowds needed Him, He understood that intimacy with the Father was essential to fulfilling His mission. In the same way, God pulls you away from constant noise so your spiritual sensitivity can increase. Clarity is born in quiet places. Distractions weaken faith by feeding doubt, fear, and comparison. Certain voices constantly question your calling, minimize your growth, or remind you of your limitations. God removes these voices not because disagreement is wrong, but because persistent negativity erodes belief. Faith is fragile in its early stages of growth. God protects it until it becomes strong enough to withstand opposition. God also removes distractions that drain emotional and spiritual energy. Some relationships require constant explanation, constant reassurance, and constant compromise. Over time, they exhaust the very strength needed to pursue God's will. Elevation demands endurance, and endurance requires conserving spiritual energy. God cuts off unnecessary drains so your strength is preserved for what truly matters. Another reason God removes distractions is to refine obedience. As long as distractions remain, obedience becomes delayed or partial. God desires full surrender, not divided loyalty. When distractions are removed, choices become clearer. You begin to move faster, pray deeper, and obey without hesitation. Focus accelerates destiny. Distractions also distort identity. When surrounded by too many opinions, you begin to define yourself by external expectations, rather than God's calling. God removes these influences so your identity can be anchored in truth. Elevation requires confidence rooted in God's voice, not in the approval of people. God silences competing voices so His voice becomes the loudest one in your life. The process of removal can feel uncomfortable because distractions often provide emotional comfort. They fill silence, occupy time, and offer familiarity. But comfort can be dangerous when it delays growth. God values purpose over comfort. He allows discomfort temporarily so fulfillment can be permanent. What feels like loss is actually liberation. God's protection through removal is an act of love. Just as a gardener prunes branches to increase fruitfulness, God cuts away what hinders growth. Pruning is never pleasant, but it is always purposeful. Without pruning, growth becomes wild and unproductive. With pruning, fruit becomes abundant. During this season, it is important not to replace removed distractions with new ones. Many people uncomfortable with silence rush to fill the gaps God creates. This delays the work He is doing. Instead, allow God to occupy the space. Let prayer replace noise. Let scripture replace opinions. Let obedience replace hesitation. As focus sharpens, direction becomes clearer. You begin to recognize doors God is opening and paths He is closing. Distractions once clouded your discernment, but now your vision is aligned. You no longer chase everything, you pursue what matters. This is a sign that elevation is near. If God is removing distractions from your life, do not resist. Do not interpret it as punishment or isolation. Recognize it as preparation. God is protecting what He is about to release through you. He is guarding your calling, strengthening your faith, and aligning your focus. What lies ahead requires clarity, courage, and commitment. God is ensuring that when the time comes, nothing will pull you away from your purpose. What He removes now prevents regret later. Trust the process, stay focused, and allow God to lead. Your destiny is worth protecting. Loss is one of the most misunderstood experiences in a believer's life. When something or someone leaves, the immediate reaction is grief, confusion, or fear. The human heart naturally associates loss with punishment or failure. Yet in God's economy, loss is often a strategic act of love. God removes not to empty you, but to prepare you for increase. What feels like an ending is frequently the beginning of something far greater. God cannot add what is new while you are holding tightly to what is old. Many blessings require space. Space in your heart, your mind, your schedule, and your life. When everything is full, nothing new can enter. This is why God sometimes allows relationships, opportunities, or seasons to close. He is not taking away. He is making room. Divine replacement always follows divine removal. Throughout Scripture, God consistently replaces loss with increase. Job lost Nero, everything, yet his latter days were greater than his former. Ruth lost her husband, her security, and her future as she knew it, but that loss positioned her for a divine connection that changed her destiny. Even Jesus spoke of seeds falling into the ground and dying before producing much fruit. Loss precedes multiplication. Loss exposes where trust truly lies. When God removes something valuable, He reveals whether your confidence was rooted in the gift or in the giver. Elevation requires trust in God alone. If your security depends on people, positions, or possessions, elevation will shake you. God removes these dependencies so your foundation becomes unshakable. Loss also purifies desire. When certain things are taken away, hidden attachments surface. You begin to recognize what you depended on for identity, comfort, or validation. God gently removes these supports so your desires realign with His will. What once felt essential is revealed as optional. What truly matters becomes clearer. Many losses feel unfair because they come without explanation. God rarely explains removal in the moment. Explanation comes later, often after elevation has occurred. If God revealed everything at once, faith would not be required. Trust grows in the gap between loss and understanding. That gap is where spiritual maturity is formed. Loss makes room for divine connections. God never removes without intention to replace. When one relationship ends, God prepares another that is healthier, stronger, and more aligned with your purpose. When one door closes, God positions you for a door that leads to greater impact. What you lost made space for what you need next. Sometimes loss removes emotional clutter. Carrying too many unresolved relationships, commitments, and expectations weighs down the soul. God clears this clutter so you can move freely. Elevation requires lightness. You cannot rise while burdened by unnecessary emotional weight. Loss frees you to move forward, unencumbered. Loss also teaches gratitude. When things are taken away, appreciation for what remains increases. You learn to value God's presence above all else. Gratitude keeps the heart humble and humility attracts grace. God gives more to those who are grateful for less. The timing of loss is critical. God often removes things right before a breakthrough. This can feel cruel, but it is intentional. Breakthrough requires focus, flexibility, and obedience. Loss simplifies your life so you are ready to respond when opportunity appears. What seems like delay is actually alignment. It is important not to romanticize loss, but to redeem it. Loss hurts, and God never dismisses that pain. He acknowledges the grief, but He does not leave you there. He walks with you through it, using it to shape character and prepare destiny. Mourning is allowed, but despair is not necessary. If you are experiencing loss, resist the urge to fill the empty space prematurely. Let God define what comes next. Fill in. Space too quickly can delay God's plan. Allow the emptiness to draw you closer to Him. In that closeness, clarity will come. Loss is not evidence that God has abandoned you. It is evidence that God is actively involved in your growth. He removes what no longer serves your future, so He can introduce what will. Trust His timing, trust His wisdom, and trust His heart. What God removes today creates room for what He will release tomorrow. And what He releases will be greater than what you lost. There are seasons in life when God intentionally leads a person into quietness and apparent isolation. This can feel confusing, especially in a world that celebrates visibility, connection, and constant affirmation. Yet throughout spiritual history, isolation has been one of God's most powerful tools for preparation. Before God elevates someone publicly, He often strengthens them privately. Isolation is not punishment, it is training. When external support is reduced, internal strength is developed. In isolation, you can no longer rely on applause, encouragement, or reassurance from others. You are forced to confront your own faith, fears, and motivations. This process builds spiritual muscle. Just as physical strength grows under resistance, spiritual strength grows in solitude. You learn how to stand when no one is cheering. Isolation deepens dependence on God. When familiar voices fade, God's voice becomes clearer. Prayer becomes less about routine and more about survival. You begin to seek God not for what He gives, but for who He is. This kind of dependence produces unshakable faith. When elevation comes, you are not moved by praise or criticism because your confidence is rooted in God alone. Many of the greatest biblical figures were shaped in isolation. Moses spent years in the wilderness before leading Israel. David lived in caves before wearing a crown. Jesus spent 40 days alone before beginning His public ministry. These quiet seasons were not wasted time. They were preparation time. God uses isolation to strip away pride, impatience, and self-reliance. Isolation reveals identity. Without constant comparison to others, you discover who you are in God. Social noise often distorts self-perception. In solitude, labels fall away and calling becomes clearer. You begin to understand your purpose, not by observing others, but by listening to God. Elevation requires a strong sense of identity, and identity is refined in isolation. Isolation also exposes weakness. When distractions are gone, unresolved issues surface. Fear, insecurity, doubt, and pride become visible. God brings these to light not to shame you, but to heal you. Healing in private prevents collapse in public. God would rather correct you in isolation than discipline you on a platform. Another purpose of isolation is to teach obedience. Without the influence of others, decisions become a matter of personal conviction. You learn to obey God even when no one is watching. This builds integrity. Elevation without integrity is dangerous. God tests faithfulness in private before entrusting influence in public. Isolation strengthens discernment. When surrounded by many voices, it is difficult to hear clearly. In solitude, spiritual sensitivity increases. You begin to recognize God's leading more easily. This discernment becomes essential in seasons of elevation, where decisions carry greater weight and consequences affect more people. Isolation also develops emotional resilience. You learn how to manage disappointment, uncertainty, and silence. You learn how to wait without becoming bitter. Waiting is not passive, it is active trust. This resilience prepares you to handle pressure, criticism, and responsibility without breaking. It is important to understand that isolation is seasonal. God does not call His people to permanent loneliness. He isolates to prepare, then reconnects to assign. The mistake many make is resisting isolation instead of embracing it. They chase connection prematurely and miss what God is forming within them. During isolation, your response matters. Complaining prolongs the season, while surrender accelerates it. When you submit to God's process, isolation becomes fruitful instead of frustrating. You begin to see growth, clarity, and peace emerge Isolation also teaches compassion. Those who have walked alone develop empathy for others. They understand pain, rejection, and silence. When God elevates them, they lead with humility rather than pride. Isolation produces leaders who serve, not dominate. If you are in a season where you feel alone, do not assume something is wrong. Ask what God is building. He is strengthening your faith, deepening your character, and preparing your heart. He is teaching you how to rely on Him fully. When the season ends, and it will, God will bring the right people into your life at the right time. You will emerge stronger, wiser, and more grounded. What isolation built in you will sustain you in elevation. Divine pruning is one of the most painful, yet powerful processes in a believer's life. When God begins to cut away certain people, habits, opportunities, or mindsets, it can feel like loss or even rejection. But pruning is never done to destroy, it is done to increase fruitfulness. God does not prune what He intends to abandon. He prunes what He plans to grow. In nature, a vine that is left unpruned grows wild. It may look full, but it produces little fruit. The branches compete for nutrients, energy is scattered, and growth becomes weak. A skilled gardener cuts back healthy branches, not dead ones, so that the plant can redirect its strength and produce more fruit. In the same way, God often removes good things to make room for greater things. Divine pruning challenges our understanding of blessing. We often equate blessing with addition, but God often works through subtraction. He subtracts what limits productivity so multiplication can occur. This is why pruning can be confusing. It does not feel like progress. Yet beneath the surface, strength is being concentrated, purpose is being clarified, and capacity is being expanded. Pruning exposes attachment. When something is cut away, the pain reveals how tightly it was held. God uses this moment to teach surrender. Elevation requires open hands. You cannot receive more if you refuse to release what God is removing. Pruning invites trust. Trust that God knows what produces fruit and what only consumes energy. Divine pruning also refines character. Certain traits cannot survive elevation. Pride, impatience, insecurity, and fear must be addressed before influence increases. God removes situations that feed these traits and introduces conditions that challenge them. What feels restrictive is actually corrective. God shapes character in pruning seasons so integrity remains intact in seasons of abundance. Pruning strengthens focus. When unnecessary branches are removed, direction becomes clear. Energy once wasted on distractions is redirected toward purpose. You begin to move with clarity instead of confusion. Fruitfulness requires alignment, and pruning aligns life with calling. Pruning also increases spiritual sensitivity. As distractions fall away, intimacy with God deepens. Prayer becomes more sincere. Scripture becomes more alive, and obedience becomes more natural. God uses pruning to draw you closer to Him. The closer the relationship, the greater the fruit. There is also protection in pruning. Unchecked growth can become vulnerability. Too many responsibilities, relationships, or pursuits can expose weakness. God cuts away what overextends you so you remain strong. Elevation brings pressure, and pressure requires stability. Pruning builds that stability. One of the hardest aspects of pruning is timing. God often prunes right before fruit appears. This can feel discouraging, but it is intentional. The closer harvest approaches, the more precise the pruning becomes. God fine-tunes what will produce lasting results. Short-term discomfort produces long-term impact. It is important not to resist pruning. Resistance prolongs pain. Acceptance accelerates growth. When you trust the process, pruning becomes purposeful rather than painful. You begin to see God's wisdom in what He removes. Peace replaces confusion, and faith replaces fear. Pruning also prepares you to handle increase responsibly. Fruitfulness attracts attention, opportunity, and responsibility. Without pruning, increase can overwhelm. God ensures that when fruit comes, you have the structure to sustain it. Pruning creates that structure. If you are experiencing pruning, do not interpret it as failure. God is not displeased with you. On the contrary, pruning is a sign of favor. God only prunes what he intends to make fruitful. He sees potential others cannot see. In time, fruit will appear, more abundant, more lasting, and more impactful than before. What was removed will no longer be missed, Becca. Use what remains will be stronger. Divine pruning produces greater fruitfulness, deeper peace, and lasting influence. Trust the gardener. He knows exactly what to cut and what to keep. What he is doing now is preparing you for a harvest that will glorify him and bless many. What you are experiencing is not random, and it is not wasted. God is intentional in every removal, every separation, every quiet season, and every pruning moment. When people leave, distractions fade, and familiar support disappears. It does not mean God has forgotten you. It means he is carefully preparing you for something greater. Elevation is never accidental. It is the result of divine order. God separates before he promotes, removes before he replaces, and prunes before he multiplies. Each uncomfortable season has been shaping your faith, strengthening your character, sharpening your focus, and deepening your dependence on him. What felt like loss was actually preparation. What felt like isolation was actually training. What felt like delay was actually alignment. Do not measure this season by what you no longer have. Measure it by who you are becoming. God is building something within you that will sustain what he is about to release through you. The strength you gained in silence will carry you in visibility. The faith you developed in loneliness will anchor you in abundance. The obedience you learned in hidden places will protect you in public ones. Trust God's process, even when you do not understand it. Honor the season you are in without rushing ahead or clinging to what God has released. Elevation is closer than it appears, and when it comes, it will make sense of every tear, every goodbye, and every closed door. God is not removing people to harm you. He is removing them to elevate you. And what he is preparing will be greater, purer, and more purposeful than anything you left behind.